Sweet. We'll just share the link and then we'll be underway shortly here with all sorts of stuff to talk about. I mean, that US game was just unbelievable, and
You truly hate to see it. I mean, not really though.
but you kind of do, but you really don't. Oh boy. Um, did you share the link on socials, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah, I've done it on 86 forever, but I'm not logged in on my phone to third sub, so you're gonna have to
I'll have to carry the
grab that
plug
one. A peek behind the curtain for.
for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
Lucas Diaz is my god.
I mean, we're
Where is that? Bo says, where is David Milenkovic? Asking the real questions. I love that.
I mean, we're gonna find out if the Church of Diaz has many disciples tonight based on how he plays. So
Yeah, I'm excited. So, anyone who listened to the third sub, our last show, will know Alex has kind of proposed starting 11,
it's
and it's not. I guess
similar.
it's not entirely dissimilar.
Similar. I mean,
No Daniels, but I'm very curious to see how they're going to set up. They've kind of gone with that three fullback setup again, and so I feel like Bassong's the natural guy to play a little higher up, but we're going to have to see what they choose to do. I do feel like Broguillard's been really quiet this tournament, not that involved, and I feel like he's a guy that could really stamp his authority on a match. He just hasn't, whether it's tactically or whatever, hasn't had the opportunity to do it. So I don't know. Maybe if Canada can break through tonight, that's something that might happen. I'd love to see that.
yeah,
Big
I
fan,
think
big fan of the player. So
Zachary Bogiar. That's it. He's could be a sleeper agent today for Canada because, like you said, he hasn't really stepped up and played to the level that he's capable of. I mean, defensively he's done his job, but Canada's gonna need goals, and they're gonna need a guy like ZBG to step up. So I'm curious to see what he can bring to the table. I mean, Zorhan Bassong, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about him playing in midfield. Personally, he's a left back. You have a guy like Aiden Daniels on the bench, but he played well last game. I don't think he was a problem last game, but you certainly would be nice to see him at left back, say. But Godinho's been good enough where you can't take him out of his position.
yeah, I mean, Godinho's been one of the really positives, positive surprises of the tournament so far. Like he's been consistently quite strong, and I don't know if that was something I was necessarily relying on going into the tournament. But man, do we want to? I mean, pour one out for DC. I feel bad.
He's
And
gonna
it
play.
sucks.
I still feel like he's gonna play. They have 5 subs. Like if he's on the bench, like might we see like the halftime, the lights go down, and just kind of the WWE style entrance of
Yeah,
Canada. You know,
I guess my only concern would
Captain
be that
Canada.
it's too late at that point. Like if they're down 2-0 or something like that, and then he comes on, it's going to be maybe too little too late. But hopefully, I don't know. I said before we hopped on here that I don't, even without Derek, obviously he's an important player, maybe the most, well, I think Buchanan
He,
probably at the end of the Buchanan at the end of the day is right up there because
well,
you got to score goals too.
I mean,
Although
Canada,
DC did provide one.
he
Yeah.
scored. He scored like he's been involved in 2 out of 3 of
Yeah.
Canada's goals too. So it's not like he's
Totally.
not. I just would think Canada without their defense, they're nowhere. They're nowhere here. They're not at this point in qualifiers. So DC is a huge absence. I do think again, defending is a collective thing. It's not something you do on your own. So they're more. How do you put it? They're more able to handle his absence. But I do think
Yeah.
if you're worrying a little more about Derek Cornelius not being there versus, I mean, if Tajon Buchanan wasn't there, but he's here. We want to, I think hopefully Buchanan can step up to the plate today because I think if we're talking about guys who have been kind of sleeping as of late, I think Buchanan would be the kind of guy you need today to unlock Canada's offense because as you showed, it runs through him a little too much. So maybe tactically, Mauro Biello, maybe let's not try to see so much of play go through Buchanan, but I mean, maybe with Brim out there, that could offer a different focal point again. I think Theo Bear, they're not properly utilizing Theo Bear's full potential, and I think we both know that. I think many of you listening probably know that as well. But hey, maybe off the bench, Theo Bear can bring in a different impact that maybe someone like Brim might not offer up top.
Yeah, I really hope that. I mean, I've said this a lot, but they need to find a way to spark those guys. Like especially Brim's been very quiet all tournament, and so I don't know if it's kind of self-fulfilling where the service isn't great, the build-up isn't great, so then those attacking players don't get a feel. They're not settled into matches, and then they continue to not be great because, it just kind of goes back and forth. So I'm really hoping that Bielo's made some tweaks to, they can't just be a hoof it to Buchanan and hope for the best. I mean, it could work. All you need is one. All you need is one. But I'd like to see a little more. And with Diaz, I think we're gonna get that, right? Or at least that's the hope.
Yeah, and then for anyone joining us now, I've got my Twitter open as well. We've got the chat open. If you got any questions or comments for us, we'll be following along. So just going through. Yeah. Alex, go ahead. Is not above my shoulder. That's Roberto Luongo and Sidney Crosby. I think Freddie Montero's back there. And then for some really OGs, there's Mark Fistrick of the Vancouver Giants.
Oh, I absolutely love that. That's amazing.
So that's quite the throwback for those who've watched the Vancouver Giants. I mean, I miss them playing at the Vancouver Coliseum, or Pacific Coliseum. Sorry, we could talk about that in a whole other show. But going down, interesting question from Sebastian is Theo Bair going out on loan?
It's a good question. They keep Mark Dos Santos keeps banging on the David Egbo drum and like how excited they are to get him in, but I don't know. I think that they've also talked so much about squad rotation and how much they're going to have to rely on their depth. Like, I don't know if anyone out there who's listening was listening in on the latest Dos Santos call, and our friend Har asked about, the battle between Jake Nerwinski, and we're getting way off track into Whitecaps stuff here, but that's what this show is for. It's for getting off track. So they're talking about the battle between Bruno Gaspar and Jake Nerwinski, and Mark was so aggressive in his there's no starters and bench players. We're going to need every player on the squad. And
well, then play Theo Bair.
Right. And so, I think that if that's the logic, then you're not loaning out Bair because you intend to play him when Cavallini's away. You intend to, double match weeks. You intend to show him prominently. Obviously, my trust in the ability for Theo to get a ton of minutes is low because it just that faith hasn't been met or answered over the last couple of years. But I guess maybe 3 months ago, I would have said, maybe it's time for him to go out and loan. I feel like the Whitecaps are just keeping him this year, though. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. That's just kind of where I feel like it's leaning right now.
Well, it's just I think you and I both. We're on the Theo Bair train of give him minutes and let him thrive, and just don't put him in these roles where it's like it's frustrating because we're seeing it with Canada now, where he just gets stuck in this time loop of getting a start. He runs around for 60 minutes, doesn't get the ball, gets benched. He comes off the bench, looks really good, scores a goal or does something, gets a starting role, gets benched. Like you have to stick with him. You've got to work with the team so they can actually feed him the opportunities he needs. But maybe I'll always be biased because I'm a striker, so I'll always get mad at a lack of service versus a lack of production. And I think watching the Whitecaps over the years, the problem always has been a lack of service, because if Bair's going out there and missing a lot of chances, okay, you consider benching, but don't bench a striker just because he doesn't, get involved in a game where no one's feeding him the ball. But I mean, that's a whole other rant. But we'll quickly move down we'll stay off the Whitecaps chatter today. Today is all about Canada. I mean, live match commentary. Hey, maybe one day. I don't know if this is the platform, considering there's about like a 20-second delay from when we talk to when we.
Yeah, there's a healthy amount of lag. So even apologies if we're getting to your comments and queries late, because we're just slow. Tuning in. Yeah.
But going down the list, I mean, interesting score predictions. Maybe we want to go to that one after. We'll talk about that. We can talk about the senior team first, just that whole Cayman Islands fiasco. I mean, Sam, you're also getting some requests to turn up your lighting if that's
Well, the problem is that it's very, very bright behind. If I open the windows, you'll just get blinded. So it's either super moody and dark, or like the light would just be terrible and I would be like pale white like a sheet. So unfortunately, if the whole setup was the other way and the desk was against that wall, it would actually work well. But it's just, we're making do with what we've got. So
I mean, yeah, and Sam's an intellectual with the bookcases. He's not gonna change the he's not gonna change the setup. But moving down, let's just talk about the Cayman Islands. Like, what a fiasco that was. And I mean, for those who haven't seen what happened, basically the Cayman Islands, they're supposed to, as is protocol, you submit your tests before the game. You don't want people with COVID playing on the pitch. Obviously, there's strict contact tracing. So if someone does get does get sick, there isn't an outbreak, you can still play games. That's not the issue internationally. It's not, if a COVID case happens, they're well equipped to handle it. But I've just never seen anything like this where a team fails to get their testing in time for no reason. There was no reason given. Could have been just they forgot to test some players, nothing. It was just they forgot to get it in on time. They delay the game. It's grounds for a forfeit. It is.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, Canada's doing them a solid, I feel like, right?
Yeah, it's like it's just pure negligence from their part, and they could have forfeited, but Canada needs goal difference.
Yeah.
Because it's World Cup qualifiers.
And they're probably going to get goal difference in this match, if we're being honest.
If they feel their rage from this sort of decision, I hope they bring goal difference to the table. But it just shows how farcical it is from CONCACAF that a team is allowed to just first of all, this sort of testing should be handled by the Confederation so that teams have to show up. It's regimented. If they fail to comply, there's some sort of harsh punishment that is fair to all parties. It was kind of make it up as you go. Oh, they kind of did their test. Okay, we'll postpone it. Should have been forfeited. But it's good for Canada. They get an extra day rest. They get, all the motivation they need to take care of the Cayman Islands. You do worry about roster constraints. Will anyone head back to Europe? But I don't think that's going to be a problem. Alphonso Davies, he's suspended for the weekend. Besiktas doesn't play till later in the weekend. Apparently, you look down the roster; those were the two main concerns, Laren and Davies. I think, Hoylett's not really playing for Cardiff, so I don't know if they'll be calling him back with open arms right away. Pacos de Ferreira you might wonder if they call back Steven Eustachio, but that just might mean a chance for Samuel Piet or someone else in the midfield. So I don't think that's the end of the world there. So if you're Canada, nothing really changes in terms of you just get an extra day of rest, which is a valuable commodity at this with such congestion between games. But just what a farce from CONCACAF, first of all.
Well, and this is the second time we're seeing major COVID issues very, very close to the lead up to a match. And I guess it's worth talking about, just very quickly going into the semifinals, goal difference mattered. And now to think that Honduras has beat the U.S., they're on to the Olympics, and part of that success is profiting off a center back playing keeper for 25 minutes. Just what a wild world, right?
Yeah, and imagine that, because the thing is, if we're going to talk about the Honduras game, Honduras, I swear, they're a special beast in CONCACAF. They look mediocre for 3 games in their group stage. Then they just show up to the U.S., play their best game, make it through the Olympics. I swear they do this in every World Cup qualifier, every tournament they end. They just have this way of sleeping their way through the games that sort of matter. And then they're the last team you want to face in a big game. They just really are a different beast. And when you talk about mentality versus talent, in most obviously soccer is a game of talent, but especially in a region like CONCACAF, it just shows you how far mentality goes, really. That teams like Honduras, they have this X factor that teams like the US and Canada just aren't there yet. They don't have it yet, quite frankly.
They look like a totally different team today, which, I mean, not that the US played terrifically, but it's still, Honduras definitely stepped up their levels from what we saw all tournament, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it shows, because talent wise, if you're making a prediction based off what you saw, Honduras didn't look particularly great. They didn't have any world breaking tactics, but they just fought their hearts off, really. And then they made the US. I mean, the US, obviously, they didn't show up today. So if you're Canada, you're looking at the Canada-Mexico game. Obviously, Mexico's a more talented team. They're probably the more organized team having played together. But if you're Canada, as cliche as it is, and we're not usually the type to lean into these types of cliche, but you have to believe and you have to work hard. As ridiculous as it is to say, you have to believe and you have to work hard. But moving down some of the comments here, obviously, for those wondering, I used to be a striker, as Bo pointed out. I do play as a number 6 now because we're all for reverse conversions, but I used to play as a striker. That's why I'm saying that. And Honduras, yeah, we'll talk about Honduras, U.S. since it was asked, as we mentioned. I am disappointed for the U.S. though. If I'm the U.S., I thought while they were missing a lot of talented guys, I mean, just shout out first off Jeremy Ebobisse and Eric Williamson. Those are the two I see from Portland. I got to watch a fair bit of them this year. They should have been there. The U.S. should have brought them. But talent
Yeah,
aside,
daily arrive a reminder that Ebobisse, like, it was a coach's decision, or
yeah,
what was that comment again? Something ridiculous.
Coach's decision for a guy who scored like 15 goals in the last two
Idiotic.
seasons.
They really could have used someone like that.
But talent aside, just the work effort, the work ethic today, in today's game was just unacceptable. But
I'm diving into the comments here.
I was gonna say, I think this is a good time for me to go on my David Ochoa rant. Or
yeah,
whatever.
no better time than the present.
So my frustration though is obviously Ochoa. He made a horrible mistake on the U.S.'s second goal. Yeah. MVP of the U.S.'s tournament up to this point. He makes a horrible mistake, and then I hate that goalkeepers are going to get dragged saying, "Oh, you should play it simple. Don't play out of the back. It doesn't work." That's one mistake out of 1,000 passes, 2,000 passes made. Like,
and you see this in big matches, elimination matches, like world class quality keepers at times make errors they wouldn't normally make because of it's a position where when the pressure level is really, really high and the margins are super, super thin on some of those decisions, just that little bit of hesitation creeps in and it can get away from you really quickly.
That's it. And I don't get I get the argument of, oh, you should lump it up the field. Okay, great, if that's your philosophy. But the U.S. are losing. They don't exactly have, like, say, a Daryl DK up top who you can launch balls to. They're not going to be launching long balls to Jesus Ferreira, who's like or Jesus Ferreira, who's a borderline winger playing at the number 9 position, or Sebastian Soto, whoever else they had up at 9. You're not going to launch long balls. I mean, yes, Ochoa could have had a little more awareness. It's a big game. Nerves get the best of you. You hate to see it. But I just kind of hate this modern football stance. Like, oh, you hate the modern football because they're playing with their feet. Goalkeepers.
How dare they play out of the back?
And yeah, I worry for Canada because, I mean, they have been playing a lot of modern football, and that could come back to bite them against Mexico. Will press pretty well, but if Canada, to be fair, they should be lumping up the ball and hanging on against Mexico. There's no doubts about that. But I'm not going to be obviously score one for the anti-modern football enthusiast with that goal, but I'm not a big fan with that sort of rhetoric, that sort of discourse, if I'm being honest. But we'll move down some of your comments. This one's an interesting from Francisco. Steven Eustachio, thoughts on him? He's moving to Porto at the end of the season, supposedly, rumors have said. I mean, Sam, any opening thoughts on Steven Eustachio with the senior team?
I mean, just super, a match against the Bahamas. So, okay, we take everything with a grain of salt, but super, super impressed. This is something that I think Alex and I both wrote articles about this guy back in 2019. Like, I was at the time, it was like, this would be a good Whitecaps target. And the progression, it was like that. It was honestly that perfect buy low stock. Like, everything had gone wrong for him at that time, but you knew all the underlying stuff was there so long as he could stay healthy. Because some of those, I think it was a knee issue, right? Like, it was pretty like serious at the time.
Torn MCL, all that. He was
it was one of those like year-long recovery periods. But he always had the tools, and now that he's had an opportunity to play and kind of all those things have fallen back into place, like, super obviously happy to see that he's committed to Canada and going to a club like Porto. Like, if they can keep rolling the way they have in some pretty major competitions, that's going to be amazing experience and potentially another guy stepping in at a really high European level for the national team. So can't complain, other than it would have been great if the Whitecaps had purchased him for like $2.5 million a couple of years ago. That would have been pretty sweet.
Yeah, but with the turf and all that, I don't know how that if that was
it was a concern for sure, and I think he had his heart set elsewhere probably.
Yeah, but to talk about Eustachio, I think he might be the most slept on Canadian abroad, really, in terms of the men's national team. Just
because he's a little older too, so he just doesn't
He's only 24. He missed out.
Right, but he's not like the 18, 19-year-olds emerging, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's easy to forget. He missed out being eligible for the Olympics as like a U23 player by, I think it was 9 days. It was, if something like that. He's born like at the end of December of '96. So like Eustachio's still young. I think people are sleeping on the fact that he went to Pacos. They were an awful team. They're at the bottom of the. They nearly got relegated from the Portuguese Liga in 20 at the end of 2020 season 2019-2020 season. This year with like minimal changes, Eustachio playing nearly every game as a number 6, scoring goals, making progressive passes, destroying and progressing, as we like to say. They're fifth. They're points off of making the European places. So obviously he's played a big part of that. You can't doubt that. And I think that's why Porto's going after him. And I'm very excited to see what he can provide, because for Canada, their midfield is their strength, no doubt. And just having guys like Eustachio, Mark-Anthony Kaye, Atiba Hutchinson, Samuel Piet, Scott Arfield, Jonathan Osorio, going down the list, all competing for starting roles. And that doesn't even get into, guys like a Michael Baldissimo, who's not that far off the national team conversation now if he keeps going, or Liam Fraser, for example. Canada's depth at the midfield. You need midfield is probably the most important position in all of soccer. So the more depth midfielders that you have, the better. But we'll move down here. Bo's getting a little ahead of himself for Canada potentially making the Olympics. We'll find out if his offers for an Airbnb in Japan prove fruitful later. And yeah, we'll talk about the lineup. I don't even know if we did talk about the lineup for Canada.
Not really in depth. No.
Canada versus Mexico. So for those unfamiliar, we tried to break it down. So we got James Pantemis in goal, and then back four in front of him, it seems like it's going to be Zachary Broguiard along with Callum Montgomery, David Norman Jr., and Marcus Godinho. I mean, solid back four. Missing player, Derek Cornelius. He's on the bench. Might we see him in the second half? You'd hope so, just because he's a huge absence. Probably Canada's MVP up to this point. He is Canada's MVP. There's no discussion. You go into midfield, you got Michael Baldissimo and Patrick Metcalf, two of Canada's, quietly good players this tournament. You got Zorhan Basong playing this hybrid wing fullback midfield role. I don't know what to make of that. And then up front, Tajon Buchanan. On the wing, as usual, you got Charles Andreas Brim in for Theo Bair, a bit of surprise, and then the X factor, the difference maker, the guy everyone's putting their hopes on, 18-year-old Lucas Diaz, who just still blows my mind. He's eligible for the 2026 Olympic qualifying cycle. Sam, I mean, thoughts on your lineups from your perspective right away?
Yeah, very interested to see how the midfield group is going to work if Basong is part of that, which is kind of what you'd expect, just how those guys are going to play. Is it a 4-4-2 diamond? Is it a 4-3-3? What does, it's going to be very fluid. I feel like there's going to be a lot of movement within that. But yeah, how do Baldy and Metcalf kind of link up with Basong and then get Brim and Buchanan involved? That's obviously going to be big. But at the same time, Canada's probably going to have to play pretty structured defensively and just look to hit on the counter as much as they can. But we've seen now, especially through the first semifinals, that okay, so Mexico didn't crush the U.S. The U.S. lost to Honduras. Honduras was right in there with it's all very, very close. So I don't feel like it's maybe as much of a massive, David versus Goliath situation as Canada versus Mexico would usually feel like. The margins are pretty small.
Yeah, well, you do wonder, for me, like, you look at the lineup here, I'll just pull it up. Absent says, I wonder if Aiden Daniels could have made maybe a better option instead of Zorhan Basong in the midfield. I think Theo Bair is a big absence up front, because we talk about Canada countering. He offers you that. I think maybe his speed can be a bit forgotten at times, and I think if you want to play through Tajon Buchanan, you need to offer a different focal point. I think Theo Bair provides that more than Brim, but to not to throw Brim under the bus. I thought he's been solid this tournament. I think he's had good moments in games, but I think it's more just symptomatic of the problems of the front three, is that they just haven't been getting the ball enough in areas they're good at. Like Buchanan isn't getting the ball in his feet in those 1v1s with fullbacks, those wide areas, those inside channels. Bair hasn't been getting the ball much at his feet. Brim isn't really getting the ball in the run where we can do damage, and that's shown. So I think someone like Lucas Diaz, that could really change something, because he's one of the only guys looking at the roster who can play kind of a little deeper but really burst the ball forward. Someone like Michael Baldissimo, he can progress the ball, but his progression skills lie more in his ability to pass and break lines. He's not a real dribbler or a sprinter, where someone like Diaz, he's going to offer something between the lines that Canada doesn't offer. So for me, I'm going to be really excited to see what Diaz brings today.
Yeah, I'm cycling through a few of the comments I haven't gotten to just yet. One of them is, when is Nikos Overhool coming on the pod? It is a very good question. I've been working hard. I asked for him to be a podcast guest the day he was announced. We're still waiting on it. That's really all I can say. Hopefully soon, but very much TBD at this point. The other one is, when are we having Glass City on the pod? You know, if he wants to use a voice changer or something and come on the podcast to, you know, obviously keep his anonymity, would love to have him. So Glass, if you happen to be listening, you're always welcome on the show. And yeah, we'll take whatever precautions necessary to preserve your identity. So yeah, more than happy to have you.
Going down, there's an interesting talking point here from Felix. Shout out to Felix. CONCACAF, another wild day of World Cup qualifying. And I mean, we're talking about it. El Salvador. Just a reminder, people, El Salvador were, you know, a pandemic away from qualifying for the Hex, the top 6 of CONCACAF, as an automatic entry based on FIFA points. They had to go in the bottom half with the teams ranked, whatever it is, 6th to 35th, like everyone else. They drew 183 ranked Montserrat today. Montserrat has a population of 5,000 people. They have 1,000 males between the age of 15 and 39. Shout out to Felix again for that information in his article on btsfancity.com. Check that out if you haven't already. But basically, if you're Montserrat, I think if you're our age, there's like a 1 in 40 chance you're on the national team or something absurd like that, like a 1 in 39 chance you're on the national team. So El Salvador, they're not making it easy. You look at Group A, they're second, tied with Antigua and Barbuda. Montserrat isn't that far behind them with 2 draws through their first games. They're making their group look a little interesting. Otherwise, I mean, Curacao scraped by Cuba. Cuba's looking really good. They've called up some other internationals. One player, Oral Hernandez, plays for Norwich City in the championship. They're first. They're on track for promotion. And he's played in the Premier League, the only Cuban to ever play in the Premier League. So he's obviously gave them a boost. He scored a really nice goal today. Curacao didn't make it easy against Cuba. Panama barely scraped by Dominica. That was an interesting result. And, I mean, for Canada's group, Suriname is looking scary good. I think if you're Canada, that game against them in match day 4 is looming large. I do think Canada still has the edge. A lot of these dual nationals Suriname are bringing in do make them a threat for the 2026 World Cup, the 2023 Gold Cup, more down the road, but they're looking good. And lastly, I just think shout out to the St. Kitts and Nevis. There's 6 points. There's 2 games. They're undefeated. They've scored 5. They've conceded, they haven't conceded any. Trinidad and Tobago drew today, which was a bit of an upset. Or was it today? Yeah, they drew Puerto Rico today. So now St. Kitts and Nevis has the edge in that group over Trinidad and Tobago, who famously knocked the U.S. out of the last 2018 World Cup qualifying cycle. I mean, boy, all that to say, just a lot of CONCACAF just madness as usual.
I have to say, Montserrat looks like a pretty cool spot. I'm getting deep in the weeds on Wikipedia and Google Maps, checking it out. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't know how exactly that result turned out the way it did, but wow, right. Yeah.
Well, Sam, here's another interesting one for you. Any players do you think Canada could have used? So we'll take out of TFC players because obviously they couldn't come, but otherwise, any players you felt were overlooked in Olympic qualifying for this tournament?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not really. I don't know. Are there any?
I mean, Simon Colines.
It's the name, right? But I guess if he's stuck into his current setup and you don't want to break up, he's finally kind of getting some experience going again. He's just kind of gotten settled in. I don't know if for his own personal development is that the right thing. And also he's been out of favor with the Canadian setup for a couple of years now. So I think I don't mind that he's kind of waiting and working on his own development before getting back into the squad. I don't think that's necessarily a bad decision. But yeah, could he potentially have been a helpful attacking midfield sub player? Like, yeah, for sure. It's just it's never been about Coline's quality. It's just like whether he's getting the minutes, whether he's getting the experience. It's been a weird situation for a number of years now.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good point. I mean, other names, I'm surprised someone like Alistair Johnston isn't here. I'm surprised he's with the seniors. I feel like Zachary Boguillard and him could have swapped, because if Canada was going to play defensive like this, someone like Johnston, he's a solid defensive right back. I thought him and Zachary Boguillard would offer more to the other team than they're at right now. Like, I feel like Zachary Boguillard would offer more to the national team right now, whereas someone like Johnston would fit this defensive role that Boguillard's been asked to play. I mean, I think it's good. One fact I did note, there's only 2 Canadians in this U23 squad that have played Mexico at the senior level. One of them's Boguillard, one of them's Cornelius. So he's the only guy in the squad today who's played against Mexico at the senior level. That could be something worth noting. I mean, otherwise, yeah, it's just looking around MLS. It's kind of hard to know. There's not many. It's really from the 2 Canadian teams. I do wonder if a few CPLers could have been involved. You wonder if someone like even Tristan Borges could have made the list, the preliminary list, let alone the squad. Obviously, he could have been, an asset. Terrence Campbell up front. I thought he offers something different. He could have been a unique option. He can play on the wing, but an interesting guy for me is Easton Ongaro, because for him, he went on loan to Europe recently in the winter. So it's not like most of the other CPLers, which understandably they haven't played since September. They're rusty. Ongaro's been playing since December, and he could have been someone that really would have offered something different up top for Canada, something that I don't think they have in this tournament right now. So in terms of names missing, I think it's just mostly attacking options. I think Canada clearly, for the most part, nailed their selections in goal and up through the back. Maybe another center back could have been nice. I'm not Gianfranco Faccineri.
That's who the other guy I was going to bring up. I think he's maybe a little young, and if there'd been like a full CPL season last year and he'd played the way he did, I think that would have been a little more confidence inspiring, but just such a short span of matches maybe. And also, when you only have 20 roster spots, another center back is kind of not somewhere you want to spend a depth position if you don't have to. Although at this tournament with the injury problems, it in hindsight might have been a decent move. Yeah.
Well, I think David Norman Jr. was the perfect pick, because he was one a lot of people had question marks about him. Why are you taking someone who hasn't played in a year and a half? But he can play the 6, he can play the 8, he can play center back. He's your perfect depth player, and that paid off 45 minutes in when Montgomery comes off with an injury. Norman Jr. comes in, and he's arguably been one of Canada's most underrated players this tournament. So it just really shows you how selection can. You can question one selection and it can really pay off for you. So I mean, someone like Faccineri also could have played a role, but I think in these sorts of tournaments, you have to prioritize flexibility if there's ever doubt between players. So that's why I think you see someone like Zorhan Basong, who can play both fullback positions. He can play center back. He can play in midfield. He was picked. Someone like Mo Farsi, he can play multiple positions. He was picked. And guys like that, where you can, if you need, basically you need guys you can plug in and play.
Just pouring through the comments here, still trying to catch up. Caleb with a very good question, a very relevant question. So what is the highest ranking nation that you could make the national team? I don't know. I mean, I haven't played organized soccer for a number of years, so I don't know. I think I'll be realistic and say it would have to be relatively low down the pecking order. I'm not gonna flatter myself too much, but I don't know. Where do you draw the line from? It's a good question. Like, at what point does a national team just become like, okay, are you a warm body between the ages of 20 and 30? And like, at what point do you have to have like genuine
skill,
exceptional skill to make the roster? I don't know where anyone in the comment sections, sound off on where you think that divide is. How far down the world rankings do you have to go before you just get to, hey, can you kick a ball around and are you reasonably athletic?
Yeah, that's it. Because it's one thing between backing yourself as a pro. That's why it's an interesting question. I don't know where I'd put myself. I mean, personally, for example, I watched the 193 ranked Cayman Islands. I thought I could maybe play for them. I mean, it's something where it's like, it's hard to judge for yourself because you only, in your own eyes, you're always a little better than maybe you think you are. So, hey, I got a few Golden Hour teammates in the comments. Kev claims I can play supposedly for Montserrat. So maybe if he says so, I'll believe him. But it's something where it's hard to judge your own abilities on that. You'd probably have to let someone else judge those abilities. But it's
And
certainly
Montserrat's currently
they
above
drew
the
El
Cayman
Salvador.
Islands in the rankings. So
I don't know. It's like it's something, yeah. Or I mean, you look down the list. I'm just going down. Do you think maybe like someone like 98th ranked Luxembourg, something like that? Is that someone you could potentially play for? I mean, if not, again, it depends on. I think it would have to be a CONCACAF nation if we're really realistically going to do this exercise. Just because, even if you go over to like continents like Africa, there's just so many good players in all countries where it's a lot harder to say. I think maybe even Oceania could be an underrated, underrated shout, but it's an interesting question to do, and I think it'd be certainly a fun debate to have between friends to see who backs their other mate. I mean, looking otherwise, I mean, Bo, if in terms of physicality and in terms of picking up yellow cards, he'd fit really well in Honduras. But otherwise, talent level, I do think there's a little work to go on there for him. But
certainly got the CONCACAF, stir the pot nature. So I'll give him that.
He has a CONCACAF mouth on him, that's for sure. And as I say that, he's chirping me saying that I'm like Cavallini, no end product. But I mean, anything else we want to dive into? Do we want to?
Actually, okay, there's one thing. I don't know exactly how it got sparked, but it's been a source of debate on Twitter all day, and I guess it comes up every time there's relatively significant men's national team or Canadian men's soccer matches. It's the broadcast coverage. Are you willing to pay for one soccer? Is it good for the game that it's, behind a paywall rather than on a national network? And I don't know. I have a variety of thoughts that basically span from I don't mind paying for the streaming service, but I also realize that, well, probably all of us here are in a relative minority where, we're kind of
We
junkies for this content and are happy to pay for it. But there's a lot of people out there that maybe the paywall's a distraction or like it takes away from that. But I don't know. I also don't know if there's just a ton of casual men's national teams fans that are totally going to watch it if it's on broadcast, but not going to watch it on a streaming platform. I don't know. I guess I just personally wish that the product on One Soccer was a little bit better. Like that certainly like the user interface, I have challenges from time to time getting things to actually load properly, stay loaded. There was a couple, I was trying to watch US versus Dominican Republic, and Gareth Wheeler's out there like giving people tech advice on Twitter because no one could get the stream to work. I think if One Soccer could up their level above that to it be a little more reliable, then I'd probably be pretty happy. So I don't think my complaint stems from it being behind a paywall, but I can understand how some people have a problem with that.
That's it. You got to pay for content. I think if it's on TSN on Sportsnet, you're going to have to pay anyways. It would be nice. I don't know if this is a bit of a long shot to say that theoretically for national team content, it should be on your national broadcaster. So if anything, CBC should step up to the plate and show all of their Canadian, national teams, both women's and men's. I think that's certainly something to consider. But in terms of One Soccer, I think they've ponied up to the table. They've paid the money. They offer a service. I don't think them offering the service is the problem. I do think they're missing a potential opportunity to cast these games on a TV, getting a One Soccer channel as was the plan. I think last year, obviously the pandemic played a role in that not happening. I just think it's important to get your national team on TV any way possible. So I get the argument of people saying, basically where I feel on this is I don't think One Soccer is to blame. They're not the issue. They're in fact they're offering more than what was being offered before in terms of just content. But I think the fact that your national team isn't on TV is laughable. You look in other countries, it's so much different. And it's a way to grow the sport. If you're a young Canadian, for example, we're going to look at the men's national team. Yes, they're paying the Cayman Islands, but for a young Canadian kid playing soccer, to see someone like Alphonso Davies, a UEFA Champions League winner, Bundesliga champion, all this, like someone that most people know, to put on the Canadian shirt and represent his national team, nothing more would drive interest for that than having that on national television. So my issue is for more the fact that it's not on TV.
I do genuinely wonder, and I wish One Soccer was a little more forthcoming with their numbers. Like I'd love to be able to see some kind of straight up side to side comparison. You know, if the match against Bermuda had been on One Soccer and then the match against the Cayman Islands is on CBC and they're at relatively the same time of day, you know, if they're both like say midweek and they're both at 6 p.m., then you get a really straight up comparison and you get to see, is it truly like a grow the game thing where you double or triple quadruple your viewers because it's on a national network, or is it the same core group of, you know, 5,000-10,000 people tuning in no matter where it's available? I'd be genuinely quite curious because I know this is an issue in other sports. Like I pay a lot of attention to a lot of people that discuss golf coverage, and there's always this talk about like, oh, you got to grow the game, you got to put it on national TV, and it's like, well, sometimes there just aren't those casual fans out there. Like there's either the people that really want the content or there's the people that just don't care at all. So I don't know. I hope that in Canada there's that casual viewer base that would tune in if it was easily available, but I'd like to see numbers to back that up.
That's it. I don't know why there's so much secrecy behind the numbers if you're, you know, for One Soccer's case specifically, or just networks in general. There's nothing wrong with being honest with your numbers. If your numbers aren't good, share them. If your numbers are good, share them. You're not going to grow if you're not accepting that, because as much as it is, a casual fan could be like, oh shoot, One Soccer is not pulling in the fans they should be for national team. I'm going to tell 5 friends to watch the next Canadian game, and so on and so forth. And you're going to kind of create this snowball opportunity. So it's just important to, and I think we're seeing that with One Soccer. I think a lot of people are doing a great job of getting their friends involved in One Soccer and getting the national team, but there's no better way than TV, just because for some people streaming services aren't the way. But to be fair, if you're looking at it from the other perspective, the same people aren't going to like the streaming services or that. They're always going to complain about something. So those people are the kind of ones where it's always going to be hard to keep them happy. So that's where I'd kind of lie on this debate. And then just seeing some of the comments. Paywall isn't the worst. I agree. Paywall is never a problem for content. If it's good content, I'll pay. As long as you provide a good service, I have no problem paying. It's like going to a stadium. You know,
but then there is a requirement. If you're going to pay for it, then people are going to expect a certain level of coverage, and they're going to want you to back up the fact that you've asked them to pay for the content. So I think that's maybe part of the issue with One Soccer at times, is that they could maybe do a little bit more to kind of reward their subscribers.
And I mean, they're doing a good job already. They've got a lot of content, but again, like you say, it's all about really you really got to show your value to some people. And maybe at first, since it's a new service, you almost got to overwork. You can't be comfortable with what you're giving already. You have to almost give more just to show the potential value offered to users, because in this modern world of content, people don't like paying unless they get value back. And you know, One Soccer, I think One Soccer has given me plenty of value, but it's one thing is actual value versus perceived value. And I could see why a lot of people aren't feeling like before they actually buy the service, they could see why it's not worth it to them. So that's where it's like with DAZN. I always thought when I was, you know, a few years back, like, why would I ever get DAZN? It's useless, illegal streams and all that. I actually got DAZN a few years, you know, a year or two ago, and it was just, the quality was immense. It just was so easy to use. Like, it was so worth it. And you realize, okay, yes, it might be a little much, you know, a little expensive, you're not used to it, but when you actually see the results, the value of the perceived value wasn't high, but then you actually see the value. It's a whole different ballgame.
I'm pouring through Twitter here, and there's nothing better than watching U.S. men's national team pundits freak out and panic when they lose matches and important matches. Just, there's everything from like fire everyone to, guys, this isn't even a big deal. We haven't qualified for the Olympics the last couple times. It's all okay. Don't worry about it. Honduras is a good team. I love seeing it's like people are just, you know, it's like a ship's going down and people are just desperate for life rafts or, you know, life jackets, whatever they can grab a hold of. Because, I don't know. U.S. didn't impress all tournaments. So I don't think that it's massively like shocking or out of the norm necessarily. And, you know, just similarly, like even if I think either way this match tonight goes, I don't think if Canada all of a sudden plays really well and is able to knock out Mexico, I don't feel like that's shocking. At the same time, if Mexico cruises to a casual 3-0, I don't feel like that's going to floor me either. I think it's pretty, especially when you take it to the under 23 level and you don't have all of your top players available, the competition's going to be pretty tight. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to try tonight, no matter what happens, to stay out of the massive overreaction. This means everything, and there's irreparable damage done. Whatever happens, and it's experience for these young guys, and I'm not gonna freak out either way.
Yeah, and then
or try not to, at least.
And then going through the news, there are some interesting points brought up about, the diversity in content right now at the Canadian soccer level. And I do think like having more diverse people in content positions in the soccer world, and that's a very interesting discussion for returning to the whole One Soccer talk. I do think they have a huge opportunity in terms of platforms they're giving to younger journalists. I think they've done a good job at giving them opportunity, but they haven't done a great job at getting more diverse voices. I think if you look out through their team, I think within their first year, they had only 1 or 2 non-white people on their broadcast. Obviously, they've done a good job at bringing in more women, so shout out for that. But even now, the only black person on their broadcast or non-white person is a former player. And he's only on a few, once every few weeks, or he's not on regularly. So it's a good point about with platforms like One Soccer where you're kind of trying something different. There's always a chance to, use your opportunity, use your platform, get those voices out. So that is a very, very interested concept. I think looking through the idea of, them leaning into to new things and structuring it similar to Twitch, offering.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I'd really like to see that. Like that, just and the interactive element too, right? Is a massive bonus to kind of encourage people to get involved in a very kind of front-facing way.
Yeah, it's certainly. I'd say you've got this unique platform. Lean into the absurd. That's what I'm always for. If you're gonna leave TV and leave traditional modes of content, try absurd things. As One Soccer, have a live show where you're interacting with people in the comments, asking you questions. Do stuff like that instead of just offering, the traditional mold of television. You have a chance to offer something new. And then running down, the US will never qualify for the World Cup unless they qualify for the Olympics. Interesting take. We'll see how true that ends up becoming. And then looking down, pundits freaking interesting one from Caleb again. On the note of pundits freaking out, what is appropriate response after a disappointing youth level tournament? That's an interesting discussion. You know what? We'll close off our show with the answer to that question. I mean, lastly, just before I forget, if you always want to peek behind the curtain, I don't know how this works, but I was writing down my stat tracking devices for today's game. So if you want to get a behind the scenes of how I watch soccer, this is the desk I watch it, and I'm going to be stat tracking. But we'll finish off with Caleb's answer question, unless there are any good last minute questions. And if you guys are interested, we'll obviously be doing more live shows in the future. If you want something like a live show after the game, we'll certainly consider it if it allows, if there's interest in it. But if not, stay tuned for this sort of thing more often. But Sam, do you want to dive into Caleb's question?
Yeah, it's a good one. I guess my opinion would lie somewhere in terms of like try to keep it relatively analytical rather than emotional. I think that obviously like especially I think for national team, it's understandable to be a little more emotional. Like when you're covering a club, there's a certain level of kind of distance you want to keep. But when you're a Canadian, you're covering the Canadian men's national team, like obviously there's clear allegiance there, and that's understandable. But even so, I feel like if you're going to consider yourself a commentator on the national team that you're from, and you're writing on that, you're speaking on a podcast about it, you're just even prominent on Twitter, you have to. I mean, I guess you don't have to do anything, but I feel like if you want to be taken seriously, you kind of have to hold yourself to a standard where you're not going to let emotions, anger, frustration, disgust just completely overrule logic or like big picture analysis of the team. And especially like calling out coaches or individual players and stuff like that on something more than like a tactical or just game performance level. If you're really diving into it, this guy's not the right leader for the team, whatever. I don't know. I feel like that's where the line starts to get crossed a little bit. So just keep it professional, basically.
It's interesting though because the U23 tournament, in particular for this one, I guess youth, it depends on the whole context of your program. So, for example, if we're looking at it from a Canadian perspective, you want them to do well at the youth tournament. I think a lot of their lack of success in recent 5 to 10 years is indicative of a lack of, of a lack of talent at the national team level. It showed. I mean, even now you look in the guys that are all in the national team, yeah, there's a lack of guys who came up through Canadian youth programs, and it shows on the other hand that you don't need successful youth to be good at the national team. You can have just a good mix of guys coming up at the right time. They're good enough where they dodge having to play for the youth national teams, kind of like Alphonso Davies, who really hasn't played for a Canada youth team since he was 16. Ditto with Jonathan David since he was 16. Those kinds of guys, they pop up. That happens. The national team pool is small. You don't need a huge amount of guys who've come up through your national team youth systems, but on the other hand, it's more competition. You want a deeper pool. You want it helps your national team in the long run. So absolutely, you should be putting stock in doing well in youth tournaments. I'm not saying you should give up on youth tournaments. Who cares? But I think it's more indicative of how the health of your program, the overall depth of your program. But I don't necessarily think it's there's a huge correlation between being good at the youth level, being good at the senior level. You look at some of the most successful teams at the youth level. You got Nigeria, for example, Ghana, you got Mexico. Some of those teams, they haven't been so great at the senior level, at least relatively compared to where they are. I don't know why, but for whatever reason in Europe and in other places, a lot of their good players just end up dodging playing for the youth national team level. So it's just such an interesting discussion. I personally think it all depends on the context of your program and what the tournament is, because the reality is for most youth tournaments, you're not getting most of your top age groups. So it's not like if Canada isn't doing well at the U20s, that isn't indicative of their U20 pool, at least the top end, but it is a good indicator of your depth of your pool. And I do think that's important for long-term success of your program.
Should we be doing a score prediction for this one? I feel like it would be wrong if we didn't sign off with some kind of indication of how we feel like this one's going to go. What do you think, Alex?
I am always down for a score prediction, putting my neck on the line. So, but
I'm saying this with absolutely no idea at the moment where I want to go with it.
That's it. I'm like, do I go for like the extreme like tinfoil whack job and say Canada like 3-0, or do I go for the extreme rationale and say Mexico 3-0? I think you do have to go somewhere in between.
Ooh, goodness.
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, this is tough. This is tough. This is like heart versus head right here. So okay, I think Canada is going to get a goal in this one. I think that they've stuttered a bit offensively, but they're gonna find the score sheet. I just don't know if it's going to be enough, especially if Derek Cornelius is not available. Like I feel if he was healthy enough to play, he'd be starting, and so. For that reason, and just because Mexico is a strong side, I think I'm going to go with 2-1 for Mexico. It's going to be a really competitive match. Canada's going to be involved. They're not going to be out of play, but I do think at the end of the day that missing DC and the few struggles that Canada's had during the tournament are maybe just a little too much to overcome, especially in this one-off match with a bunch of guys that haven't played a national team match of this level before. Like DC was that experienced voice back there, and without him, some of these guys could be a little more unsettled.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I'm gonna offer just an alternative prediction because it's as we've learned in past episodes of the Third Sub. If you're a long-time listener, we love predictions. Just there's no. I'm gonna take a little bit of a contrarian take just because it's always gonna be fun to see which one was right, which one is wrong. So you know what, I'll stick with the realism. I'll say a 1-1. And you know what? We'll say screw it. Canada wins on penalties.
Yeah, I like it. Somehow,
some way, Canada scrapes through on penalties. Maybe a James Pantemi save. So
yeah.
Derek Cornelius comes off the bench and scores a penalty because he's actually pretty good at that.
Yeah, shout out to someone in the comments earlier on who was saying DC to come off the bench as a striker late in the match. I didn't get the chance to comment on that, but that's a real shout.
Yeah, that's it. But I guess on that note, this ended up running an hour. Thanks for everyone who stuck around. And I don't know if we'll be back later today. Maybe depending on the result, we might be live. If enjoyed the show, let us know. It obviously helps us, tells us if we should go live again later today. But this is the first of many live shows. Obviously, we'll follow along with Canada. We'll be on Twitter, so make sure to follow along there. I'll be tracking the stats. Like I said, I'll be writing an article. But if you guys are down to have another live show, let us know, because I thought this was a blast.
Yeah, enjoyed it, everyone. Thanks for getting in the comments and keeping it interesting, and enjoy the match. Hopefully it's a good one, and go Canada.
Yeah, go Canada. But don't sign off right away. We'll let the comments come in before.
All right.
Before we sign off. But the game is starting soon, so if you guys are get your one soccers up. The national anthems are playing. The Canada's in white. I don't know what that means. What sort of subliminal messages? I would have liked to see them in red, but Canada's in white. Yeah, the national anthems are going on.
Yeah, and shout out to Bo, because he was the one that commented about Derek. So
yeah, so I guess again, maybe see you guys later, but
yeah, we're doing it by the seat of our pants here, just kind of figuring it out as we go. But I'm glad this worked out, and yeah, enjoy the match, everyone.
All right, see you.